Meeting is being recorded.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good night, wherever you might be in the world. I am here today with a very special guest. This is Quin Hillyer. Quin, could you tell me a bit about yourself?
Yes, I'm a longtime conservative journalist. I've actually been in the vineyards of conservative journalism and/or politics for, boy, just barely shy of 50 years now. But now I am on the editorial board of the Louisiana newspapers, the Times-Picayune in New Orleans and the Advocate in the rest of the state. So that's what I do.
All right. And how did you get started in conservative journalism?
Well, I got started in conservative politics because I grew up in a house where my dad had been very involved. He actually was at the Buckley estate in 1960 when Young Americans for Freedom was founded. He was one of the 100 young people from across the country that was there.
Oh,
So I
wow.
grew up in a conservative house. He ended up as Republican National Committee man from Louisiana. But I got into journalism because I love to write and uh, I love the story, and I also thought it very, very important to get it right. I am not a fan of most modern journalistic ethics, and I want to show that it can be done right. I'm an opinion journalist, but I label myself as such. I've also done plenty of straight news, and when it's straight news, by gosh, it ought to be straight. When it's opinion, it ought to
Mm.
be labeled, and even then, uh, it ought to be fair, it ought to be factual, and it ought to be thorough. So there.
You said you're not a fan of some modern journalistic ethics. Are there specific practices that you're not a fan of?
Yeah, well, uh, opinion pieces masquerading as straight news pieces, uh, cable news networks not bothering to distinguish between news and opinion, uh, people that are on TV and on what's supposedly a news hour and freely offering their opinions. All of that really bothers me. It also bothers me when opinion journalists decide whose side they're on and what answer they want, and then go cherry pick facts or arguments to support that conclusion, which makes them activists first, not journalists first. If you're journalists first, you have principles that you are going to apply, but your job is to see what the story is, ascertain what the facts are, and let the facts guide you to a conclusion, no matter whose ox is gored. And obviously, because you're an opinion journalist, you're applying your principles to those facts, but you have to apply those principles the same way every time and against and for everybody to be intellectually honest. And I don't see a lot of that these days.
Yeah, I've heard that in Europe there's not even a pretense of objectivity, and it's like I haven't read a lot of European media, but I used to read The Economist, where they're very they just have an economist party line, and their opinion is expressed in every single story. Do you know is that true? Is maybe I shouldn't say the American media is more objective, but does the ideal of objectivity have more weight in the American media than in other countries?
Well, it used to. I mean, it was only about a year or two ago that, oh God, which was it? I think it was a longtime editor of the Washington Post said that he agrees with a lot of the young journalists that the ideal of objectivity and balance is bogus, and that they are after the truth, not objective reporting, and that the two can be different. and I forgot. I think it was it Thomas Edsel. I shouldn't say a name because I don't remember which one. But then there was this, the backlash at the New York Times uh, against the sin of actually running a U.S. senator writing a column. This happened to be Tom Cotton of
Right.
Arkansas, and this nasty, crazy backlash that ended up getting James. Is it James Blake? I should have these names anyway. Getting their opinion editor fired for the sin of actually airing the other point of view from the young Marxists in the newsroom, and that's absurd. It's obscene. That's not how journalism should be.
I reached out to you because you were one of the signatories of the Freedom Conservative Statement of Principles. What do you
Yes.
think? What are your thoughts on the changes in the conservative movement that have happened over the last 10 years?
Oh, well, the conservative movement, as I grew up with it, is either dead or sleeping very deep in a cave. The vast majority of people, of activists these days who call themselves conservative, are anything but. They are statists. They are uh, they are for power first, uh, and
Do you have
they
any particular activists in mind?
well, just about the entire MAGA movement. Seriously, I mean, this whole idea that uh, that it's okay if your side does it because your side is right. That uh, you can determine because of the whim of an all-powerful leader that that's what your position is when your position was something else a week ago. That's absurd. But uh, in on particular issues, conservatives were always free trade. This group is
Mhm.
not. Conservatives uh, were always against big spending. This group is not. Conservatives were always for a very careful attention to the constitutional balance, uh, what a lot of people call separation of powers, although it's more complicated than that. But these people are all executive first. I, I could go on, but there's almost nothing that I see from MAGA that has anything to do with the conservatism that I grew up with, which was Ronald Reagan, Jack Kemp, and it traced its roots to what once was known as traditional liberalism, meaning Enlightenment liberalism. James Madison, uh, Locke, Burke had a different side of it, but sort of where Burke and Locke met was where James Madison was, and uh, that was Enlightenment liberalism, and that is what modern conservatives wanted to conserve. Now you've got J.D. Vance and a whole lot of his ilk who are literally saying that the Enlightenment was a wrong turn in history. They literally say that. They say that too many traditional values were thrown out, and that it is the province of the state to reimpose the traditions. That's not conservative. It's not Enlightenment liberalism. It is statism, and it is wrong.
What did you think about Vance's speech at the Munich Security Conference last year?
Oh, it was god awful. It was sickening. He put a finger in the eye of our traditional allies. He uh, basically urged a crackdown rather than a crackdown against the left, rather than beating the left by
You think
arguing
that he
against them.
urged our allies to crack down on the left in their countries?
Yes, he did. He absolutely did. And look, I want to beat the left too. I want to beat the left by winning hearts and minds of the general public against the ideals of the left. I don't want to use the power of the state to crack down against the left, except where the left breaks the law. If somebody breaks a clear law, then the state has every right to crack down. But that's not cracking down really. That is imposing order so that everybody else can enjoy their freedom unfettered. Uh, it is order to protect freedom, not order for the sake of order and for the sake of obedience.
Well, so what do you think about the concerns about, for example, free speech in Western Europe?
Those concerns are real. That Western Europe is itself not protecting free speech, to say the least. Now, Western Europe has never quite had the understanding of free speech that America has, or that the United States has, and Western Europe has always been wrong about that. Now they are more wrong than they used to be. And it is absolutely right to criticize them for that. And I guess JD Vance did that, but that's very interesting because JD Vance does not really protect free speech at home. He only protects the speech of the people that agree with him.
For free speech at home, are you thinking of like Mahmoud Khalil and Ramsey Ozturk?
What?
You said that JD Vance does not protect free
Yeah.
speech at home. Do you have in mind Mahmoud Khalil and the lady who wrote the anti-Israel op-ed, Ramzaya Ozturk? She was arrested as well.
Uh, I didn't know that they were arrested. I haven't paid attention to that case. I do know that there's a difference between speech and incitement to violence. But I have seen the Trump administration veer very close to, if not over the line, of arresting people for speech that is outrageous, but that is not an incitement to violence. And if they arrest people for that, they are absolutely wrong. I don't know the particular case you're talking
What's an example of that?
about. Well, it it might be the example you gave. There's a Was it at Harvard or Columbia, where there there've been a number of students who were disgustingly anti-Israel and or even worse, anti-Semitic, uh, actually clearly anti-Semitic. But to be anti-Semitic is not a crime. To incite violence or to threaten violence against Jews is a crime.
I think that was
Uh,
the Mahmoud Khalil guy. He was at
okay,
Columbia.
okay. Well, then we're talking about the same thing. I just didn't pay attention to the guy's name.
I actually did a report on freedom of speech in different countries. My methodology was that I looked at, for each country, I found the political prisoner who got the most severe sentence for speech that would have been protected under the US First Amendment. So
Interesting.
in a few countries, Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, of course, it's the death penalty. There have been people executed for saying things the government doesn't like there. And then in um, some countries, there's like Vietnam, for example, it's a long prison sentence. And then Western Europe, the Western European countries were actually in the bottom half of the 30 countries that I looked at. So in France and Germany, there have been people sent to prison for a year or 4 years for what would have been First Amendment protected speech in the US. In the UK, there was a guy sent to prison for 10 months because he put up some stickers with messages they didn't like. And then
Yeah.
um, there were some countries where people only went to jail for about 30 days. And there were a handful of countries where there was no one actually sentenced to prison for speech that would have been protected by the US First Amendment. And those freest countries were, it would be the US if you don't count the Mahmoud Khalil guy. I think Marco Rubio was saying that guy had lied on his visa application because they asked you, do you sympathize with Hamas? And he said no. So maybe that's an ambiguous case. But the other countries where they don't have anyone in prison for speech that would have been protected by the U.S. First Amendment are Japan and Argentina and Taiwan and also Hungary. So,
Hungary. Now that surprises me with Orban, but that's interesting.
right. I hear a lot of I hear a lot of very anti-Orban sentiment, and I don't really see the basis for it because he certainly is undemocratic in some ways. But I would say that I really support liberty more than democracy, and I think they're not one and the same thing. And what I've seen from Hungary is that really they're not. I think that frankly, people have more free speech in Hungary than the UK. There's this one person who is described as a political prisoner in Hungary by the media. And her story actually is that she was a militant who was part of this militant anti-fascist group who came from Italy, and she went and violently attacked some Hungarian protesters. One of them had to get like 30 stitches because of her attack. And so she was sent to prison for that. And then she ended up being actually, Hungary had to release her because the Italian government lobbied on her behalf, and then her supporters in Italy put her up as a candidate for the member of the European Parliament. And there's a rule that those members of the European Parliament have diplomatic immunity. And so they organized a campaign for her and got her elected as an MEP, which meant that Hungary automatically had to release her from prison.
Very interesting. I don't claim to be an expert on Orban, but I had thought that he had a lot of political prisoners, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he's got political prisoners, but not on First Amendment grounds. Could that be the case? I just don't know.
Um, Well, possibly, yeah. I was only looking for people who would be in on speech crimes. What I've heard from Orban is that there is a lot of real corruption. I think he had a giant soccer stadium built right outside his hometown, which is this tiny town that would never have a stadium
Mhm.
other than political connections. But I don't know of anyone who's actually in prison as a political prisoner there.
Okay, that's very interesting. I thought he was one of these uh, impose the traditions against, you know, just use the state to impose traditions. I have, of course, seen that Orban is despicably pro Putin and pro Russia, anti Ukraine, and on those grounds alone, I don't want anything to do with them.
What do you think about what are some cases where you've seen some concerning moves against liberty in America, like trying to impose traditional values? What would you say are some examples?
Uh, well, a lot of them came from the left in previous administrations. A lot of them trying to shut down parents, treating parents as domestic terrorists, treating uh, traditionalist Catholics as domestic terrorists, uh, and and clearly a lot of these speech codes on college campuses all over. A lot of that came from the left. What I have seen from the right is or not from the right, but from the Trump administration, is they now going after their political enemies, opening investigations into Chairman Powell of the Federal Reserve, opening investigations into who else have they opened investigations into that was just absurd? Oh, opening investigations into congressmen who quite clearly and accurately stated the law on when military personnel can ignore orders, and for stating the law, a law that actually is emboldened on a plaque right there at the naval at the campus in Annapolis. They tried to open an investigation into those senators. That is very chilling. Not only is it chilling, it depending on when and where the senator said it, it could also violate the speech and debate clause, which is in the Constitution. Either way, it is absolutely inappropriate for the Justice Department to do.
What is the speech and debate clause?
The speech and debate clause says that no one uh, in the House or the Senate shall be made to answer for anything they said uh, in the House or the Senate or pursuant to their duties. They will not have to, quote, answer in any other place, meaning they shall not be taken to court. Uh, and that is so that they can speak and debate freely on the issues in the House buildings, in their official correspondence, et cetera, et cetera.
On your appearance on the Reagan podcast, you talked about how you think conservatives should think it's about the rules and not about the outcome. And in particular, you mentioned Jeff Sessions and how um, he recused himself when the chief ethics officer told him to, even though Trump had made it clear that he would be punished for
Yeah.
recusing himself. I think this is at the heart of some of the debate between maybe the free con side and the nat con side, because it seems like in principle, what if the chief ethics officer is corrupt? I mean, there's nothing to prevent the chief ethics officer is a position is going to be held by a human that's presumably as fallible as any other politician. So, what do you think about how much fidelity we should have to the rules um, if the system itself is corrupted?
It is not the system itself has all sorts of checks and balances. I'm not just talking about separations of powers, but all sorts of ways uh, that the how did Madison put it? I'm usually really good at quoting Madison, but basically the cure for sins of democracy must be found in the system of democracy. And they designed a system that does that. Nobody has the right for himself to say the system is corrupt and therefore I'm not going to break the rules. If he thinks the that things are corrupt, he needs to work within the system to get uh, to get votes, et cetera, to go change the system by constitutional means. That it's supposed to be a self-correct, not a self-correcting mechanism, but a mechanism by which everybody has equal protections in trying to correct what they see as errors, including systemic errors.
Um, do you think that a substantial portion of the federal government's activity over the last century has been unconstitutional?
You could definitely argue that it has been unconstitutional. The Constitution gives only certain delineated powers to Congress and to the federal government, and clearly they are the government has gone way beyond its delegated powers. The answer to that is to go win elections and to undo it.
Well, it seems hard to win elections that way, though, because it seems like your opponent can just get lots of pork for the district and brag about bringing in millions of dollars. And if your message is that you're the no pork guy, you're not going to do so well in the election. We sort of saw this with the Tea Party movement, and then in really the 2016 election. I think in 2015 it seemed like maybe Rand Paul or maybe even Ted Cruz would get in and be fiscally responsible. And of course, Trump really blew that up and ended fiscal responsibility for good. And I think that the voters are really just not very sympathetic to
I
the eat your green
disagree.
vegetables approach. You disagree?
I totally disagree. Look, I was there in the 1990s when Republicans took over the House for the first time in 40 years, the Senate for only the second time in about 50 years. Uh, we I was on the Appropriations Committee. I worked for Appropriations Committee Chairman Bob Livingston. We cut $50 billion, which back then was big money, from domestic discretionary spending, not from the rate of increase or projected increases, but actual money cut, not taking inflation into account, taking projected increase into account. We cut $100 billion. We also did some reforms around the edges of various entitlements, and we completely reformed welfare, and that led to four straight balanced budgets. And Republicans were reelected in '96 to a majority, reelected in '98 to a majority, even though they completely botched up uh, how they handled impeachment. They were reelected in 2000. They, I think, they lost the Senate in there for one term, but they kept the House until 2006. So they kept the House for 12 straight years, and the Senate for either 8 or 10 out of the 12 years, even though uh, at least for the first 4 or 5 years there, they actually not just cut the budget, not just reached a balanced budget for the first time in ages and ages, but ran bragging about having done so, and that got them reelected. The Tea Party came in 2010, and nobody gives John Boehner credit when he was Speaker of the House, but the budget deal of what 2011, which conservative activists trying to raise money raked him over the coals for, uh, put actual real domestic discretionary spending limits that were obeyed for the next 4 years, and they were very strict and they were very effective. uh,
What years
so
was
I
that?
don't what
What years for you said the
uh,
next 4 years?
So I think the budget deal I'm talking about. Okay, so if the Tea Party election basically was 2010, I think this was the budget battle at the end of 2011, and domestic discretionary spending in for fiscal years 2012, 13, and 14 stopped growing. Actually ratcheted back, although it looks like it ratcheted back more than it did because they had also had the big one-time spending binge to get out of the financial crisis. But still, if you see the amount of money spent on domestic discretionary spending, it had gone up like that, and then it suddenly stopped going up, and it actually went down some, and then leveled off. And I've got these right on my screen. I call it up all the time. You can go to the White House. What do they call it? The White House historic budget tables, and I think it's chart 5.6 if I remember right. And you can look at domestic discretionary spending going back the last 50 years, and you will see that the Tea Party was very effective.
But do you think that part of Trump's appeal is that promises to give everyone, he promises to never cut Social Security and never cut Medicare and just promises everyone the moon?
Yeah, look, but he's uh, yes, that is part of his appeal. Then again, Trump has never gotten 50% of the vote. Ronald Reagan got 41 states and like 50, what, 2% of the vote to 41% in 1980. He got 49 states and something like 60% of the vote in 1984. Between 1980 and 1984, they had substantial cuts in domestic discretionary spending. They uh, did some very early nibbling at welfare reform. They reached a deal on Social Security, and he ran on that record and won a re-election with 49 states, which completely obliterates anything that Donald Trump has ever achieved.
All right, we're coming up on a half hour. Thank you very much for the interview, Quin Hillyer.
Thanks,
And
Simon. I appreciate it.
where can people find your writing?
Well, you can Google Quin Hillyer and NOLA.com, NOLA, which are the Louisiana papers, or you can go to QuinHillyer.com. That's QUIN with just one N, and Hillyer is HILLYER. You can go there anytime, and once a week I update it. Now, almost all my writings are from the Louisiana papers, but it used to be that I wrote for all sorts of things. And you can also go way, way back there and you can see stuff I've written for National Review, for the American Spectator, for the Washington Examiner, for the Washington Times, on and on and on. So anyway, QuinHillyer.com, and you can also subscribe for free.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. Appreciate it. Bye.